Hello, everyone. I'm Tanya Rivero. Thank you for joining us. Republican Cindy Hyde-Smith has won Mississippi's Senate runoff. Republican Cindy Hyde-Smith defeated Democratic challenger Mike Espy. Hyde-Smith is the first woman elected senator in Mississippi. The seat has been controlled by Republicans for more than 35 years. The seat will remain red. President Trump held 2 rallies with Hyde-Smith in the state to gin up the Republican base, something Hyde-Smith said was critical to her victory.
Mr. President, and I just talked to him, so I know he's watching. Thank you so much for everything, for the opportunities, for coming to Mississippi yesterday. 2 stops, phenomenal. Tupelo was unbelievable. The coast was unbelievable. We got to ride together, and I sure appreciated the time that he gave me.
Hyde-Smith has been serving in the Senate under a temporary appointment since April. She was chosen by Governor Phil Bryant to fill the seat vacated by the retirement of Thad Cochran, a fellow Republican. Hyde-Smith defeated Democrat Mike Espy. He's a former agriculture secretary in the Clinton administration. Espy became competitive late in the race after Hyde-Smith made a comment about a public hanging. But Espy faced questions of his own over his time working for Clinton and as a lobbyist.
While this is not the result that we were hoping for, I'm very proud of this historic campaign. So make no mistake, tonight is the beginning. Tonight is not the end.
Leslie Sanchez, CBS News contributor and Republican strategist, joins us. She's in Washington, and CBS News political correspondent Ed O'Keefe is at Espy Election Night headquarters in Jackson, Mississippi. And Anthony Salvanto, CBS News director of elections and surveys. Thanks to all of you for being with us. Ed, let's start with you. You've been traveling the state the last few days and speaking with people there. What did you learn about this race? And in the end, did the results surprise you?
This is about what everyone here expected, a single-digit result or difference between Hyde-Smith and Espy, at least if you look at the numbers right now. Democrats were able to eat in to the Republican dominance in this state for a variety of reasons, whether it was concerns about Hyde-Smith and what she has said, or the fact that she's still a relatively unknown statewide political figure, and people remember Mike Espy. But at the same time, the math simply just doesn't work here for a Democrat, at least not yet. The Espy campaign understood that he had to bring out as many African-American supporters in this state as possible, and throughout the day we were getting word that they hadn't been able to do that, both here in the Jackson area, in the Delta, and other parts of the state where African-American voters live. At the same time, there appeared to be lower turnout with Republican supporters, and that may be why this race ultimately was a little closer. And you talk to supporters of the senator, and they say, look, she clearly misspoke. What was perceived to be something far more malicious is not who she is. We stand by her, and we understand that. But I think she and the Republican Party in general has been served yet another reminder that that kind of language and the controversy that came with it is increasingly seen as intolerable by some, and certainly an annoyance even by some loyal Republicans. But regardless, Hyde-Smith goes back to Washington now as the 53rd member of the Republican conference in the Senate and the 24th woman to serve in the Senate. That will be a record high. So either way, she makes big history tonight as the first woman elected in Mississippi and helps women achieve a new high in the Senate.
Indeed. And Leslie, President Trump came to Mississippi the day before the election to hold 2 rallies for Hyde-Smith. Do you believe that those rallies made a difference in this race?
It absolutely did. When the media narrative, and they would argue, conservatives would argue that the negative media narrative was around her missteps, her statements, which very much were outlandish, that she's trying to walk back away from. He put basically a cover over that and allowed the energy of the Trump agenda and the Trump administration to really take all the oxygen. And that bolstered the amount of Republicans who may have been on the fence for her and decided to turn out and vote in a special election when people aren't necessarily focused on this.
Right.
So it had a really significant impact. There's no doubt about that. And you had asked earlier what were some of her agenda items. She's tweeting she's going to be lockstep with the president on ending abortion, on strengthening the military, on building a wall to end illegal immigration. So there she is touting large parts of the Trump agenda, and it works in a very conservative, faith-oriented state.
There are some of the specifics then on her agenda. It's interesting because it almost seems as if the criticisms around her misstep had the opposite effect of what her critics intended, in that they actually, rallied supporters around her.
Very much so. If you believe in this idea of fake news that the president moves forward and that this kind of vast liberal conspiracy is against kind of conservative principles, then that very much falls in line. It was somebody who is just misspoke, who is genuinely a good person who represents the values of Mississippi, and she's really tried and true somebody the president believes in. That effect creates a way to inoculate her against basically herself.
Right.
It was a race in which she was very much the one who was destroying this opportunity in a state Republicans never should have had to defend.
Right. All right. So, Anthony, what are you seeing in the numbers from this race? What story are those numbers telling you?
Well, we said at the outset that if this were going to be tighter or competitive, then Mississippi typically is, of course, right? It's a heavily Republican state. It's a place where Republicans outnumber Democrats by double digits, where they win races by double digits. If that were going to happen, that there would have to be a really lopsided turnout advantage for the Democrat, for SB. So we were waiting to see if some of those counties, even some of those smaller counties where Democrats reside, if they would boost turnout there, but in a way that was disproportionate to what we saw on the Republican side. And obviously, there just wasn't enough of that kind of lopsided turnout. It just wasn't obviously enough for SB. And then couple that with the fact that there aren't a lot of persuadable voters in that respect. Look, it's a narrative that we've seen on the Senate side this year. And as we kind of now close out the Senate map for the year, in a lot of states that the Republicans, that President Trump did very well in, went and voted for a Republican Senate candidate this year. So in that sense, not a lot of surprise.
So how much in the state of Mississippi do voters sort of fall along racial lines? I mean, I've read that it's a very sort of divided state that way.
Well, in the first round of this, in November of this election, Mike Espy got, I think, 15% of the vote from white voters, and obviously the lion's share of votes from African-American voters. So there is that divide to that extent. And, I think the other factor, though, is that you see the president having a very high approval rating there. Again, the exit poll from the first round showed that he had nearly a 60%, it was 59, 60% approval rating in the state. So that buttresses the kind of Republican support as well. So, really both those factors.
Are there strong pockets of purple in Mississippi?
Not a lot.
Not a lot.
Not a lot. No, I think what you see in other states, in places like, say, Arizona, places that the Democrats did manage to flip, a state that had previously elected Republicans, is you had more persuadable voters. You had a higher percentage of independents than you do in Mississippi. You had a higher percentage of some of the demographic groups, if you slice it that way, that the Democrats have done better with. Suburban women, for example, who might swing and vote Democratic, who did in a lot of House races.
You're not seeing that in Mississippi.
But not so. In this race, it's a little harder to tell. We didn't exit poll this round, but you can see from the patterns county by county that there really wasn't a lot of room to move there.
And even the counties with big cities.
Well, some of the counties like a Jackson County, et cetera, it's not quite analogous to a place where you've got, whether it's in Illinois or even in Indiana, where you've got a large pocket of a large city that gives you a disproportionate amount of vote where, Democrats can kind of build a margin. Even Jackson, say, maybe it's 8, maybe it's 9% of the total statewide. That, if it's a Democratic stronghold, isn't enough. You've still got to win. A Democrat still has to win across a lot of rural areas and across a lot of suburbs where in Mississippi, unlike in some other places, they typically just do not.
Absolutely. Well, Ed, I want to ask you this next question. How are Democrats who made strides in Republican strongholds this midterm season preparing to take this momentum into 2020?
Oh, That's a great question, Tanya. I don't know what lessons they can necessarily draw from Mississippi, other than perhaps if we look at all of the different races across the country where Democrats succeeded and where Democrats came up short. There is one theme, I think, that after tonight we can sort of point to. You had younger, fresher, more dynamic candidates prevail in those House races and in the Senate races than sort of older establishment types who maybe are well known in their states but just couldn't pull it off this year. Mike Espy joins an interesting club of people like Ted Strickland in recent years, Evan Bayh in Indiana, Phil Bredesen, who ran in Tennessee, folks who have long time careers and histories in their state, but hadn't necessarily been present or part of the current political conversation until they decided to jump into a race. But look at where Democrats did well. Kirsten Sinema, still relatively new, younger candidate. Same with Jackie Rosen in Nevada. All those House races that they won in the Northeast, out west, fresh faces that came out of the woodwork to run for the first time. And I think that'll be a lesson that they take from this, that you've got to capture that grassroots energy, that younger, more dynamic candidate, and find ways to continue winning. Democrats face long odds in trying to take back the Senate in 2020 because they're going to have to challenge Republicans in places like Iowa, Colorado, that have larger rural populations, like here in Mississippi. And, I just think that sort of talk of generational change is bolstered by results like this one where, yeah, Mike Espy had the name recognition, but wasn't necessarily someone who found great fondness among a younger generation of voters here.
Very, very interesting. It almost sounds as if you're predicting an even more polarized Congress in the future, with the House becoming sort of younger and more dynamic, and the Senate perhaps staying a little bit more establishment, if you will. Leslie, will there be a different kind of attention on HydeSmith once she gets to Washington after all the fanfare of this race is over?
She can settle it back into a club chair and relax. No, that's not exactly what happens in the Senate. But it's exciting now to see how we don't really always know how these senators start to shape their staff offices, their positions on committees, what they bring back. But she's very committed to the idea of following lockstep with the president. We cannot discount that and the impact it'll have on her state. She has a lot of really serious issues to think about, though. There's education reform issues in Mississippi. She has a lot of racial polarization that the state needs leadership to bring together. And so she's going to certainly have her challenges. And that's really where I think, from a Republican perspective, there's tremendous runway for her to be a leader in this space. And I think there's a lot of support to see her do that.
All right, Leslie Sanchez, Ed O'Keefe, and Anthony Salvanto, thank you so much for sticking around for the official end of the 2018 midterms. The election fun just doesn't stop. It's over. That's right.
It's over.
Thanks to all of you.